Okay, so are you putting your learners at risk? Is there real risk involved when people do your e-learning courses? Okay, let's have a think about that. And I am at the moment trying to build a course where my learners are actually going to be at risk. So I'm building a course where, as they go through the content, when they get a question wrong, we're actually building into the software where an electric shock will come through the mouse, and kind of like a taser effect. So if they make the wrong choice, they'll never do it again. So we're working pretty hard on that new concept. No, we're not. But I know some of you were actually thinking that's a pretty good idea. No, but I'm not really talking about physical risk. What I'm talking about is, are we challenging our learners? Is there some element of risk when they do a course? Or do we make it so easy that by the time they do all the content, they do the quiz, they get it wrong, oh, you've actually unlimited attempts. You've now until the end of time to keep going through that quiz until you get it right. We just want 100% completion rate on our LMS. We don't care what you get out of it. So are we putting them at risk? And I suppose it's something to think about, make our content a little bit more challenging. And that sort of brings me into my topic today, which is an interesting title, Personalising Learning Through Conditional Interactivity. In a nutshell, that really means making the content in your online courses a bit more meaningful by applying conditions. They have to meet certain conditions before they can move on. Sometimes maybe the taser effect might work well, other times maybe just a simple, you didn't do too well, you've lost a few points. I suppose this is sort of what I'm going to be talking about today in very briefly. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but it's applying conditional interactivity. Whenever I talk about conditional interactivity today, I'm talking about applying conditions, applying gatekeepers to your content. They've got to meet certain conditions before they can continue on. And that type of conditional interactivity is pretty much like a gamification technique. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about that today. Risk, tasers, conditions, and gamification. That's going to sort of be the sort of run through. We're also going to be looking at variables. So what are variables and how could you use them in your own content to give more power to your courses, to make your content more challenging. And at the end of the day, what we really want is a more meaningful experience. You know, I used to read a lot of this stuff by Michael Allen where he talks about the 3 M's. Meaningful, memorable, and motivating. And anybody who knows me knows I'm a bit obsessed with the 3 M's. But it's a nice little benchmark to work towards. So can we use conditions? Can we use variables? Can we make it more challenging? Can we make it a better experience? One problem, and I know a lot of us run into this, is using the same techniques for different types of knowledge. And I think Tom Coleman alluded to that this morning when he talked about, you know, is it information-based or is it performance-based? So are we using a lot of the same techniques for the different types of content? One size fits all. We know it doesn't work, but sometimes we might be time poor, we might need to get it out there, they might just want a course. Sometimes we just end up doing that. The reason why we use technology, well, I suppose I should probably say I use technology, is so I can enable those new learning experiences, so I can give more power to my content, so I can be more creative. And that's, I suppose, for me, what I love about using technology, what I love about e-learning design. Why are you here today? And I think Jerry asked that this morning. Some of you are here probably for new ideas, for more sophisticated strategies, to reimagine learning. And I think we're in a really exciting time where we're dealing with millennials coming through, where their way of learning and their way of interpreting information is different. It's changing. So we have to reimagine learning, reimagine how we teach, how we train. And we've got to ultimately make the experience meaningful, memorable, motivating. So that's, I suppose, when we could use conditional interactivity. The learner's got to meet certain conditions. They've got to get to certain points in the content before they can continue or progress. So you're sort of, I suppose, either rewarding them for getting so far, or else it makes more meaning for them. It's more personal for them as they go through. They can start using the information in their own context. This is pretty much an example of gamification. You've got to meet conditions before you can move on to the next phase. But what is gamification? And I think we hear a lot about it. We hear a lot about it at the moment. Tom, thanks for saying it was a new fad. That sort of took the kind of glamour away from my presentation. But, you know, we hear this word coming through all the time. But it's nothing really that new. It's nothing that we haven't done before. And in the past, I was a school teacher. You know, we used to use a lot of games in our content as well. People probably use it in their training as well. It's nothing new, gamification. What it is it's really about using the elements of games that are fun to promote learning and engagement. What makes people save princesses, dodge bullets, stay online for about 10 hours? What makes people do that? What is it, the hook that draws them in and wants them to have more and more and more of that experience? Or maybe share that experience with their friends, with other people that they work with. So how can we harness that power? How can we take those elements and put it into our online courses to make them more meaningful, to make the learning experience a little bit more personal? Whenever you hear gamification, it is associated with certain elements. And I've taken these elements from the book Gamification of Learning and Instruction by Karl Kapp. It's a great book if you're interested in the topic. It's written very simply, lots of good ideas related to learning and development. Gamification, I suppose, came about from in a business sense. So sometimes when we read articles or research into it, it comes from a business perspective. I like Karl's work because it sort of comes from that learning and development education perspective. Okay, what is it? Well, it's got to be game-based. So there has to be some elements of rules, interactivity, some elements of challenges, okay? It's got to have the mechanics of games. So simple mechanics that you would probably be familiar with is levels, badges, points, scores. It could also include the aesthetics. So what draws people in to play World of Warcraft for 9 hours straight? The aesthetics, it's that visual appearance that draws people in, that visual interest on the screen. So that's pretty important. Game thinking. So game thinking really relates to things like storytelling, exploration, discovery, cooperation, collaboration. So using some of those elements as well. Engagement. What is it that hooks people in? How do people engage with, let's say, as I mentioned, World of Warcraft or some of these online games? People and motivation. Who are the people doing, or I suppose, playing the game or doing the course, and what's their motivation? Is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic? One of the most important parts of gamification is it's really there to promote learning and to solve problems. So looking at all those elements of gamification, you don't have to include them all. And that's one thing that Kapp, when he writes about it, is pretty strong about. It doesn't have to have every single thing. I don't have to have 15 million badges, 25 different levels, different stories, 10 different characters. I don't have to have everything shared on Twitter. It's about using some of those elements. But when you use those elements, to use them well, and they must have a purpose. I can't just bang in a score or a level for the sake of it. It's got to have a purpose. So, maybe you've been thinking about it. Maybe you've been going, yeah, gamification's going to work for me. I think that could work for some of my content. Or, you know, maybe you've already been doing it, or maybe you've never even heard of it before, and maybe you're a little bit interested. But where do you even start? You know, this could be quite an alien term for some people. Where do you even start? When I get asked this question, and I'm looking at it from a learning and development perspective, where do I start and where do I tell people where to start? It's good to start with story. Majority of the time, good games are centered around a good story, apart from things like hide and seek and things like that. But even the game of chess goes back to story, the story of two warring families, two warring factions. So story is a really important element of good gamification. And story is something that we're all familiar with. We're all familiar with using story, scenarios, case studies in our online courses or in our training. So it's a great base to start from. Stories are an important element in games. We use stories to provide meaning and context. It allows us to put that information into context. And I love a good story. I'm not programmed to remember a list of bullet points. I remember a well-done narrative when it's weaved throughout a course. When you're using story, if in your courses as part of a gamification technique, it's not the outcome of the story. So yeah, they might get to their destination. Yeah, they got 1,500 points. Yeah, they're going to share it on Twitter. It's not the outcome. It's actually the process involved. It's the journey through the story. It's the decisions you make, the actions, the choices. And that's either where you can apply your learning or else get new skills, new ideas. Now, one concept I really like, if you've done a bit of work in gamification before, you'll have seen this. If you haven't, this is what's known as the hero's journey. And when I saw this and read about this, this is when I went, yeah, I get it. This makes sense. So when game designers build games, they build them around a story, let's imagine. And it basically follows this hero's journey. So it starts off with, you've got the call to adventure, and this is just a regular, ordinary Joe So walking down the street, but something happens. And he's sort of dragged into this sort of scene or crisis. Sort of don't want to go there. They're like, nah, I've just got to get to the shop. I'm not, I don't care about saving the world. I've got stuff to do. But then maybe a guardian comes in or like a mentor comes in and go, no, we need you. You're the only person who can save the world today. So that's when you go from your known into the unknown. So you kind of cross the threshold. And then once you're in there, you face challenges, there's villains, there's things that happen. And as you go through, you might have to get help from your mentor. You gain new skills, you get all this new ammunition, you're ready to kill all the bad guys. And then you come to the revelation. You know, there's one scene where everything just goes down and you've got to fight your way out of it. At times you think you're not going to win. You're like, no, I'm going to die, that's it. But then you get through it and you've transformed and you're on your way home. You're like, world is saved, I'm happy. But then the villain comes back and he comes back and it's even a bigger battle and you've got to use all those skills and then everything's okay. And then that's when you return back to what's known and the challenge is solved. So it's a little bit like, when I saw this, it reminded me a bit of Lord of the Rings. You know, sort of little Frodo going off, mind his business, didn't want anything to do with it. Or even like The Hobbit, if you're into that sort of stuff as well. So what it made me think of, if you just after today go and read The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, read the books, just apply that concept to your courses, you're sorted. Everything is... That's what I'm going to do from now on. There's got to be a ring involved and a wizard, and they'll remember that course forever. No, unfortunately, we can't do that. But we could use concepts like this. You know, if you had a character filling out a risk assessment form, challenges come on, they get a mentor in to help them, there's some other experiences that happen, something really bad happens, but then they get over it and they go back to their normal workday. Can we use techniques like that in some of our content, probably more performance-based content, to make it a little bit more meaningful, make it a little bit more personal? So games are used to, I think I'm running out of time now, so I'll have to do a David Anderson on it and talk really fast. Games are used to immerse learners in a role to mimic a real-life activity. So again, you're taking on this role. I'm this person, I've got to face these decisions before I can get to the end and save the whole company from bankruptcy. I suppose assuming that role gets those critical thinking skills going. Why am I doing it? What are these decisions going to do? How are they going to affect the rest of the course? How are they going to affect what I do every day in work? By assuming that role, you're thinking about those decisions. You're thinking about them on a deeper level because those decisions have consequences. And really, a game is a series of meaningful choices. So that's pretty much what gamification is, a series of meaningful choices applying that knowledge. Again, it's important to remember it's not just about the badges. It's not just about the points. It's not just about the rewards. It's using all the elements together, maybe story, maybe collaboration, exploration, cooperation, motivation, using all of those techniques to make the experience worthwhile. All right, I was kind of putting together a little bit of a wee challenge, and I suppose I came up with the idea of, let's say you had, in a pharmacy, you've got some sales assistants. They want to, I'll speed it up, they want to give better advice on vitamins and supplements. You got to make the course really engaging. I just don't want slide after slide of this is what vitamin A does, this is what vitamin B does. No, I want that learner to assume a role and deal with real life consequences. So what I've done is I put together a little sort of example, and I've used variables and conditions. So conditions, as I mentioned, are really gatekeepers. The user has got to meet certain conditions before they can move on. Variables, and we use variables in Storyline. I know there's a few Storyline users here, but variables is a feature of e-learning authoring software. And it's the ability to maybe remember information. Like you type in your name, it remembers your name. That's a simple way. It does number calculations, it does true and false. So if I do something, I can only go down a certain pathway of a course. So I'm going to sort of apply gamification to that. I'm going to use story, I've got a character. I've basically built Lord of the Rings in a 2-minute e-learning course. No, I haven't. It's not that great at all. But we're going to look at using variables where the learner assumes a role. We've got some points that it's going to allocate. And I also threw in a little engagement technique because I sort of threw in a little hook that might catch people's attention. So if you bear with me, I'll just get this. And
hi everyone, I'm Rachel, Ruth's alter ego. People say I'm much prettier and smarter than Ruth, but I'll let you be the judge.
don't think so.
I'm testing a new course and would love you to try it out. I'll talk to you again in a few minutes with some more instructions. Don't miss me too much.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that, Rachel. So what I've got here, I mean, this is just something I threw together, but you've got to select a character. So you could have different characters that deal with different situations. So, you know, oh, this is another e-learning course. I'll click next. And then Rachel comes back.
Oops. You didn't follow all my instructions. Please go back and choose a sales assistant.
And that's the risk, a creepy avatar. So then you can select your character and you can give it a name. And she'll remember your name. And then you've got some instructions. And you can go through, and there's a customer, and she needs your help. I mean, this is pretty simple. But you can play around with the techniques where they've got some choices. She's really thinking about those choices. If they ask for help, sometimes I like to be really mean when I build courses. So if they ask for help and they didn't read the help instructions at the start, you're going to lose points. So there is no niceties in my courses. But I mean, just adding some simple techniques there. But you know, you don't want to use that avatar all the time, but it could be good to sort of draw them in at the start. Just to, I suppose, finish up, I know I'm running out of time, but some of the techniques that I've used, I suppose I've looked at putting, where I've used game-based, I've used some rules, there's some challenges, there's some feedback. Mechanics, there is some points. I could put in some time constraints. If they get things wrong, I could take away those points. Aesthetics, I did choose the talking avatar just for something a bit different, just to make it feel a little bit different. The visual design concept of the pharmacy and so on. The choosing of characters, different characters. Game thinking, the exploration. You could actually bring in collaboration where they share it on a leaderboard. So as they go through, everybody could have, like what Anne mentioned on the enterprise social network, where you could have a leaderboard with all your scores in there if you wanted. Engaging, assuming a role, using the story. So hopefully they'll engage with the story as they go through. People and motivation. So again, using the story and that feedback and follow-up as well. So I suppose always looking at some of those game elements and how are you applying those. On a final note, and I know I've just got to wrap it up. There I am again. Before you gamify, and this is something that's really, really important, you need to look at why you're using this technique. What's the goal and what's the benefits? To an information-based course that Tom was talking about this morning, probably is it worth the hassle? No. Maybe a performance-based course where you want to improve a skill or get them to have a new way of thinking. Some of the gamification techniques can be really worthwhile. And hopefully by applying them to meet the learning objectives with the right content and the right time, you'll get your 3 M's, your meaningful, memorable, motivating learning experience. And with that, I will let you go to lunch. Thank you very much, everybody.